Every Thursday morning for 3 years, a single rose appeared on the counter of Dara Holt's flower shop. Not a bouquet, not a arrangement, one stem, always red, always cut fresh, always left beside exact change and no explanation. The man who brought it never stayed more than 2 minutes. He never gave his name. He smiled at Dara the way people smile at someone they are grateful to without words to say so. And then he walked out, and the bell above the door chimed once, and he was gone. Dara kept the roses. She didn't know why exactly. She pressed some of them in the pages of her order ledger. She dropped a few in the small vase she kept on the windowsill behind the register. She told her friend Lena that the old man was probably just a regular who liked the shop, that some people were like that there was nothing strange about it. Lena said she thought it was strange. Lena thought it was strange every single week. What neither of them knew was that those roses were the only language the old man had for what Dara had done for his son 4 years before, on a cold November night when she had no idea what she was doing, only that she had to keep doing it. That was where the story started. Not at the counter, not with the roses. It started on the shoulder of a 2-lane road outside the city, in the dark, with a car on its side, and a man she had never met before in her life bleeding into the pavement. If you've ever driven that stretch of Route 9 north of the mall, you know how fast the dark comes in the fall. The trees crowd the road and the streetlights end about a mile past the traffic circle, and by 6:30 in the evening it is the kind of black where your headlights feel thin. Dara was driving home from the wholesale flower market, her van loaded with Tuesday's order of white lilies and carnations, running the same road she had run twice a week for 9 years. She was tired. She had been tired for so long by that point that tired had become her resting state, the water she swam in. Her shop was 11 years old. She had opened it at 27 with $6,000 saved from waiting tables and a 10-year lease on a narrow storefront on Clement Street, between a dry cleaner and a cell phone repair place. She had painted the sign herself. She had arranged her first window display on a folding table borrowed from a church. For 3 years, the shop barely broke even, and for 2 years after that, it cleared just enough to keep her daughter Simone in a school Dara believed in and keep the van running and keep the lights on. That was the math of Dara's life at 38. Not bad math, not by the only measure that mattered to her. The shop was hers. Simone was safe. She had built the thing herself and nobody could take it. She did not think about the future in terms of what she might gain. She thought about it in terms of what she could hold on to. So she was tired and she was driving and she came around a long curve and her headlights caught something that made no sense at first and then made terrible sense all at once. A car had left the road. It had gone through the guardrail on the far shoulder, rolled once, and come to rest on the driver's side in the shallow ditch. The guardrail was bent and glinting in her lights. The car was a dark sedan, one wheel still spinning slowly. And there was a man lying half out of the driver's window, one arm stretched toward the road as though reaching for something. Dara pulled over. She called 911 while she was still in the van, gave the location twice, and then she got out. She did not have medical training. She had a first aid kit behind the passenger seat that she had never once opened, and a collection of leftover floral wire and rubber bands. She had seen an accident once before in her life, years ago, on a highway from a distance, and she had kept driving because everyone else was keeping driving and there was nothing she could do. She did not keep driving this time. The man's name was Marcus, though she did not know that then. She could see he was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, conscious, but barely, bleeding from a deep cut above his left ear. He was trying to say something. She knelt in the cold ditch beside the car and she took his hand and she told him she had called for help and it was coming. And she said it again and again. "Keep your eyes open, it's coming. I'm right here." She pressed her scarf against the cut because her hands were shaking and she needed something for them to do. The temperature was dropping. She took off her coat and draped it over what she could reach of him, which was his shoulder and part of his chest. She stayed there for 19 minutes. She knew because she checked her phone twice, watching for the time because she was afraid if she stopped watching something would slip loose. She talked to him. She told him about the lilies in her van and how white lilies always made her think of her mother, which was true. Her mother had kept a single white lily in a mason jar on the kitchen sill every spring, rotating in a fresh one each week, and Dara had not thought about that mason jar in years, but she thought about it right then, crouched in a ditch in the dark because she needed something to fill the air, and that was what arrived. She told him the lilies in her van were for a funeral arrangement she had to finish by 9 the next morning. She told him she would probably still make it. She told him he had a good, strong grip for a man who was bleeding, which was not something she knew was true, but which she said because it seemed like something you said. The temperature had dropped to somewhere in the upper 30s, and she could feel it in the knees of her jeans where they met the wet ground. She told him he was going to be fine, which she believed she was required to say, even though she had no idea. She said it 4 or 5 times across those 19 minutes, the way you repeat a thing when you are saying it as much for yourself as for the person who needs to hear it. When the paramedics arrived, they moved her back gently and professionally, and she stood on the shoulder in her thin work shirt in the 40-degree air and watched them work. One of them came to her afterwards and asked her name for the incident report and said she had done well, which also felt required, and which she also believed. She went home. She did not tell Simone about it because Simone was 11 and there was nothing about the story that Simone needed to hold. She did not tell anyone, actually. Not even Lena. It had been something that happened on a road. She had done what any person would have done. She filed it away and she went to sleep, and the next morning she was back in the shop at 6:15 to receive the delivery. She had no idea that Marcus's father was sitting in a hospital waiting room across town, unable to sleep, holding the incident report number the paramedic had given him. His name was Everett Coles, and he had built what he had built across 40 years in commercial real estate, and he had done it mostly without sentiment, which was a quality he had always privately admired in himself. He was not a man given to demonstrations. He had loved his son with the kind of love that showed up in paid tuition and good health insurance and 4 a.m. rides to airports, not in words that came easily. Marcus had never doubted it. They were that kind of family. Everett sat in the plastic hospital chair, and he did not sleep because he was afraid that if he closed his eyes, the thing he had been told might change. Marcus had a fractured collarbone and a concussion and 32 stitches above the ear, and he was going to be fine. And the attending physician had said it with the calm certainty of someone who did not know what Everett was holding in his chest right then. He was going to be fine. Everett had built commercial properties in 6 cities, and he had managed the risk in each one with the careful systems of a man who did not leave outcomes to chance. He had spent decades thinking about what he could control and structuring his world around those things. Sitting in that chair at 2 a.m. with the linoleum floor and the overhead fluorescence and the distant sound of the nurse's station, he thought about how completely and simply none of that had mattered on a 2-lane road at 6:30 in November. He thought about the woman who had stayed. He was still thinking about her in the morning. When Marcus was awake enough to talk, he told his father about the woman in the ditch. He remembered her voice more than her face because it had been dark and he had been drifting in and out, but he remembered the specific quality of her voice, which had been warm and matter-of-fact in a way that he associated, for reasons he could not fully explain, with the idea of someone who already knew how to carry weight. She had told him about lilies, he said. White ones. Everett did not say anything. He spent 3 days after Marcus was discharged doing what he did when he needed to understand a situation. He asked questions and he gathered facts. He found the paramedic crew through the fire department's non-emergency line, and he thanked them for their work, and he asked about the woman in the report. And the lead paramedic, whose name was Darren, told him she had been a civilian witness who had stayed on scene, and that she had kept the patient's head still and spoken to him continuously, which mattered. That kind of thing always mattered. And he told Everett her name was Dara Holt. He found the shop in less than 10 minutes. He drove past it first without stopping just to see it, and then circled the block and came back and parked across the street. He sat outside in his car for nearly half an hour. The shop's front window held an arrangement of red and white poinsettias, it being December, and a small chalkboard in the corner that said holiday orders taken through the 20th. He could see the top of a woman's head moving behind the counter. He was not sure what he intended. He had the thank you ready, a real one, with something concrete behind it, but sitting there across the street he became aware that the concrete thing felt wrong somehow. Too large for the moment of walking in. He had thought about it in terms of proportions, the way he thought about most things, and he kept arriving at the same problem. What she had done for Marcus could not be answered in the same transaction as buying something at a counter. You could not hand a woman a check and say, "Thank you for saving my son's life," and have it be the right size for the room. He sat there until the sun shifted and the window display lit up differently. He went inside. The shop was small and warm, and smelled the way flower shops smell in winter, which is a specific smell. All green stems and cold water and something sweeter underneath. There were orchids in the window and a rack of small gift cards near the door, and a woman behind the counter with a pencil tucked into her hair and a name badge he couldn't quite read. She looked up when the bell rang and she said, "Good morning," the way people say it when they mean it. He almost told her then. He had his thank you ready, a real one, the kind with substance behind it. He had thought about what he owed and he had come with something specific in mind. Instead, he bought the only single rose in the cold case, the red one in the tall glass, and he paid for it in cash, and he left it on the counter. She called after him that he'd forgotten it. He said it was for her. He thought he might come back once, to explain, to say the real thing. He came back the next Thursday and the next. The real thing kept not arriving in the right form. Every time he stood at that counter and looked at her with her name badge and her pencil and her efficient, unhurried way of doing things, the words for what he felt compressed into something wordless, and he bought the rose and he left it, and he went back to his car and sat there for a minute before driving away. There was no plan. There was only Thursday. He came in February through a sleet storm once, his wool coat dark with wet at the shoulders. He came the Thursday after a funeral, which Dara could see from his face and which she did not ask about. He came in August when the city had been under a heat advisory for 4 days running, and he was the only customer before noon. He never varied the routine except once, early in the second year, when he came on a Wednesday instead, and Dara had been so startled that she had asked if he needed something in particular, and he had looked at her for a moment and said he had an early flight the next morning, and that was the most words he had ever used at once. And then he bought the rose and left. The exact change came in an envelope the size of a birthday card. He always had it ready in his breast pocket. $3.45, which was what Dara charged for a single stem with a trim and a paper wrap. She sometimes wondered if he checked the price before he came, if he had it ready from before, if he folded the bills the same way every time. She imagined him at home somewhere, at a table, preparing the envelope. She did not know why she imagined this. She just did. Simone saw him once on a Saturday in the spring of the second year when she had come in early to help with a prom order. The man arrived at 10:15, which was a little earlier than usual, and Simone watched him from behind the cooler display and then looked at her mother after he left and said, "Who was that?" Dara said a regular. Simone said he had smiled at Dara like he was thanking her for something. Dara said people smiled like that sometimes. Simone gave this the considering silence that 11-year-olds give things they are not sure about. Now, if you have ever watched someone do a thing quietly for a long time and never ask for a single thing back, you know what Dara was learning about this man without knowing she was learning it. You know what the rose was saying that he could not say. And if you've ever been the one receiving that kind of silent constancy from a stranger, you know it sits differently than you'd expect. It does not feel strange after a while. It feels like part of the architecture of a place. Lena said once, around the second year, that she had started to count on it, that the Thursday without the rose would feel like something was missing, the way you notice a clock only when it stops. She was right. They both knew it. Dara would have said, if pressed, that the man was someone who had found comfort in the shop, in the routine of it, the way people who live alone sometimes find comfort in a coffee place or a diner where somebody knows their order. She did not assign herself a role in the story because she did not know she was in one. Meanwhile, the shop had a good year and then a hard year and then a steadier year. She hired Lena full-time, which helped, and brought Simone in on Saturdays, which she told Simone was educational, but which they both understood was also simply nice. Simone was good with the arrangements, patient with the wiring in a way that surprised Dara, who had always been a quick-handed worker herself. The girl had her grandmother's eye for proportion. She would take 3 stems and a handful of greenery and rotate them in her hands until the thing balanced, and then she would set it down and look at it with a seriousness that made Lena laugh and made Dara proud in the quiet way she was proud of most things, which was to herself and without announcement. Those Saturdays had a particular quality to them. The 3 of them moving around the back room, filling orders, Lena humming something she never quite committed to. Simone deliberate and focused, Dara moving between them, checking the work. The shop smelled thickest on Saturdays, with the week's orders going out and the weekend orders coming in, and the cooler running harder, and the street outside showing more foot traffic. There was a bodega 2 doors down whose owner sometimes sent his daughter over for a single stem carnation on weekend mornings. Always pink, always for the same reason he never explained and Dara never asked about. The lease came up for renewal in the spring of the 3rd year, and Dara sat with the new terms for 3 days before signing. The rent had gone up again. It went up every 2 years, a little more each time. She ran the numbers and she knew she could absorb it, barely, if nothing else moved. She signed because she had no choice and because the shop was hers in every way that mattered, which was not the same thing as owning the building, a fact she understood very clearly and had understood for 11 years. She signed and she went back to work, and the following Thursday the old man came in with his rose. In the 3rd week of February of the following year, he did not come. Dara noticed. She did not say anything about it to Lena, but she noticed. She checked the cold case around 10:30 the way she always did on Thursdays, and there was no reason to check it except that she always checked it around the time he came. There was a red rose in the case, the kind she always kept there, and it stayed. He did not come the next Thursday either. She moved the rose from the case to the bud vase behind the register, which was not something she did with the shop's own stock. She told herself it was because it was about to turn, and she hated wasting a stem. She knew that was not the whole reason. Lena said maybe he was travelling. Dara said probably. Neither of them said the other thing, which was that he was old, that he was somewhere in his late 60s, that people in their late 60s sometimes stopped coming to places, not because they were travelling. On the 3rd Thursday without him, a couple came in looking for a sympathy arrangement, something simple, not too large, for a neighbour. Dara made it with white lilies and sprigs of eucalyptus, which was what she made when she did not know the person being mourned, but wanted the arrangement to be kind. She wrapped it in brown paper and tied it carefully, and when they left she stood at the counter for a moment, doing nothing in particular. Lena watched her. She did not say anything. 5 weeks passed. The roses stopped. On a Tuesday in March, a woman came into the shop in a grey wool coat and asked for Dara by name, which was the first unusual thing, and handed her a business card and said she was an attorney representing the estate of Everett James Coles, and that she needed about 20 minutes of Dara's time if Dara could manage it. Dara said the name was not familiar to her. The attorney, whose name was Kim Parrish, said that was all right. She said she thought the conversation would explain itself. They sat in the small back room where Dara kept her orders and her receipts and the extra buckets. There was a stool and a folding chair and a space heater that made a clicking sound. She sat in the folding chair with her briefcase on her lap and said she was sorry for the way she was about to deliver this information, that there was probably a better way and she had not found it. She told Dara that he had died 6 weeks ago of a cardiac event, that he had been 71 years old and that he had been planning this visit to Dara's shop for 3.5 years. Dara listened. She opened her briefcase. At that moment, the bell above the door rang, and Lena's voice called back that there was someone here asking for Dara, and Dara said, "Give her a minute." And Lena said he could wait, and something in the way she said it made Dara stand. The man in the doorway was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with a scar above his left ear that had healed silver white, and was visible because he wore his hair close. He was looking at Dara with an expression she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not grief exactly, and not gratitude exactly, and not the combination of the two. Something that was its own thing. He said his name was Marcus Coles. Dara heard the attorney get up behind her. She looked at him. The scar above his left ear was healed to silver white, the kind of scar that had been there long enough to belong to a face. She had pressed a scarf against a wound, very much like it, in the dark, in a ditch, on a November night 4 years ago. She had not seen his face clearly then, only felt the presence of a man trying to hold on to consciousness, and now she was looking at him in the clean February light of her shop, and she understood all at once that the last 4 years had a shape she had not known they had. Marcus said, "My father didn't know how to start, so he kept starting the same way." It went quiet in the shop. Outside on Clement Street, a bus went past, and the windows rattled lightly the way they always did, the way they had rattled for 11 years. Dara said, "The rose." Marcus said yes. He put his hand flat on the counter, steadying himself or steadying the moment. He said his father had sat outside this shop for half an hour before he ever came in, on a cold day in December, 4 years ago. He said his father had described her to him, down to the pencil in her hair and the way she said good morning. He said his father had gone home after that first Thursday and tried to write a letter and could not find the right sentence to start it with, and then tried again and could not, and then stopped trying and came back. He had the accident report in a folder under his arm, and he took it out and put it on the counter between them, not as proof, she understood, but as a record of the night the two of them had shared without knowing they were sharing it. She looked at it. She could see her name in the typed text, civilian witness, Holt Dara remained on scene. He said his father had been inside her shop 40 or 50 times and had never been able to say what he came there to say because every time he looked at her, the gratitude was too large for the room. "He told me once that you talked to me about white lilies," Marcus said. He thought about that every time he drove here. He said every Thursday he came in, he hoped he was doing something that added up to what you'd done. He didn't think it could add up. Dara pressed her hand to the counter. The wood was smooth under her palm, smooth from years of orders being set down and picked up. There was a rose there, the one she had put in the small bud vase that morning, the same vase she had kept behind the register since the first one he ever left. The attorney said quietly, "Ms. Holt." She laid a document on the counter beside the rose. It was the deed to 441 Clement Street. Dara looked at it. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the deed again. He had purchased the building 14 months ago, which was 8 months before his death, which meant he'd been carrying this plan through his illness, which she confirmed he had been diagnosed with a heart condition in the fall of the prior year. He had put the building in Dara's name in his trust. He had left a letter, which she produced next, written in the deliberate longhand of a man who had chosen his words the way a carpenter measures twice. The letter was 3 paragraphs. Dara read it twice and then held it against her chest and did not perform anything about what she was feeling because there was no performing it. What she was feeling was too quiet for performance. If you can imagine what it means to own the thing you built, not just the work of it, but the ground it stands on, then you are close. If you can imagine being handed that and being told that someone saw you on a dark night doing a small, terrifying thing and decided quietly, without your knowledge, that they were going to spend the rest of their life finding a way to even it, then you are closer. And if you can imagine finding out that the man who was doing this was the same man who came in every Thursday and smiled at you and left a rose and never once said a word about it, then you are there. She put the letter down on the counter. She said to Marcus, "He never told me his name." Marcus said, "I know. 11 years I've been in this building. I was scared every time the lease came up." "I know," Marcus said again, and his voice had something in it that might have broken free from him entirely if he had not kept it careful. "He wanted you to stop being scared. He just didn't know how to say it. He could never figure out the way in." Dara looked at the rose in the vase, the last one. She had bought it herself from her own case, and she hadn't known when she put it there that morning that she was honouring a ritual whose author was already gone. She had kept the first one he ever left. It was pressed flat in the back of her order ledger from 3 years ago, brown and dry now, fragile. She had kept it for no reason she could name, and now she had the reason. Lena, who had been standing in the doorway of the back room for several minutes, made a sound that she immediately covered with her hand. Take a minute with that if you need to. The idea that someone can be grateful enough to come to your door every week for 3 years and still not feel like they've said enough. That kind of gratitude doesn't ask anything of you. It just keeps showing up. The months after that settled in a particular way. Dara hired a property attorney of her own and reviewed everything, which the attorney said was wise and exactly what Everett would have wanted her to do. The deed transferred cleanly. The building was hers without encumbrance, without condition, without a monthly payment or a lease renewal or a rent increase in her future. The number she kept returning to was 11. 11 years she had operated in that building as a tenant. She had painted the walls twice and replaced the flooring in the back room herself, and had the sign repainted after a hailstorm dented the original. And all of it had been done with the knowledge that the building was someone else's ground. Now it was hers. The work she had put into it was hers. The lilies in the window were hers. The number on the door was hers. Marcus came by twice more in the weeks that followed. He sat with a coffee at the small table Dara had put near the window for people who were waiting for orders, and they talked, and it was not as difficult as Dara had expected it to be. He was a quiet man, unhurried the way his father had apparently been unhurried, and he seemed to want the same thing his father had wanted, which was to see the place, and to see her in it, and to know that it was good. On his second visit, he brought a photograph. Not a large one, just a printout really from his phone, a picture of Everett taken a few years before the illness, standing in front of a building he had just finished. Tall, broad-shouldered in a dark suit with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and a look on his face that was not quite a smile but was close to one, the face of a man who had accomplished something he had intended to accomplish and felt no need to make a speech about it. Dara looked at the photograph for a while. She had never seen his face clearly. He had always been moving when she looked at him, heading for the door with the receipt in his pocket, or facing toward the coal case, or 3/4 turned away. She had the impression of a large, quiet man, and the impression of a particular kind of stillness, but she had not been able to draw his face from memory. She said to Marcus that she wished she had known. Marcus said his father would not have wanted that. He said his father believed that gratitude given in exchange for recognition was a different thing from gratitude given without it, and that the ungiven kind was the purer kind, the kind worth practicing. Dara looked at the photograph again. She said she thought that was both beautiful and extremely inconvenient. Marcus made a sound that was almost a laugh. He said he had spent most of his life thinking the same thing. He told her more about Everett, that he had come from nothing, from a small apartment in a city nobody had thought to invest in, and that he had spent his whole adult life building because building was the only vocabulary he trusted. That he had been harder on Marcus than he needed to be for the first 30 years, and then had spent the last decade quietly trying to fix it, and that fixing things quietly was apparently the family method. Dara said she understood the family method. Marcus smiled at that, and it was the kind of smile that had the ghost of someone else in it, the wide, quiet one she had seen every Thursday for 3 years and not known whose it was. Simone, who was 12 by then and not shy about her opinions, came in one Saturday when Marcus was there and looked at him with the frank assessment children apply to situations when they know that they are allowed to look. She said to her mother that evening that she thought it was sad that the man had never just said it. Dara thought about that for a while. She said she thought maybe he had, that maybe saying a thing and doing a thing weren't always the same, and when you couldn't find the words, you sometimes found a different shape for them. That a rose every Thursday for 3 years was a kind of sentence, that a deed to a building was a way of finishing it. Simone considered this and said she still thought he could have also just said it. She was not wrong. She had her grandmother's practical eye for proportions. What Dara held on to in the months after the deed was the image of the old man standing in the doorway of her shop that first time. She had not known what he was walking into. He had not known how to say what he had walked in to say. She had said good morning and meant it, which was what she said to everyone who walked through that door, which was what she had always done, because that was the shop she wanted, and those were the people she wanted to make feel at home. She had done a small thing without knowing she was doing it. She had kept a man's eyes open on a cold road and talked to him about white lilies because she needed something for her hands to do, and he needed something to follow. She had not done it for a reason. She had done it because it was there to be done. And he had come home, and his father had found out, and that father had been a man who understood that gratitude was not an emotion but an action, and that some actions took years to arrive in their right form. The shop was the action, finally delivered. In May, when the weather shifted and the shop's afternoon light came through the window at a different angle and fell across the counter in a way it had not since October, Dara sat down and calculated something she had never let herself calculate before: what it would have cost her across the remaining years of her lease to keep the shop, the increases, the uncertainty, the math of holding on when the ground beneath you is not yours. She ran the number and she looked at it and she put the paper in a drawer. The building was hers. The thing she had built in it was hers. The two things together made something different than either alone, and she had not had the word for what that was until she owned both. Permanence, maybe. The possibility that she could plan without the footnote of someone else's decision. She had the sign painted. Not a new sign, just the old one cleaned and the letters filled in fresh because the paint had gone a little thin at the top. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the shop on a Thursday morning while the painter finished, and she looked at it for a while. Holt's Bloom, 11 years old and still hers, and now more hers than it had been. Lena stood beside her and said, "It looked good." Dara said it did. Dara had an arrangement made for Everett's grave in the end. White lilies. She drove them out herself on a Thursday morning, which seemed correct. She set them against the stone in the grey February light and stood there for a moment in the cold without saying much, because saying things out loud was not the vocabulary they had ever used with each other. She figured he would understand. The last rose he had ever left her was still in the bud vase on the counter when she got back. She had not moved it. She did not plan to. She had bought the shop's roses that morning from the same wholesale supplier she had used for 9 years, and she had arranged the window and opened the register and turned the sign. And the vase with his last rose sat behind the register where it had always sat. A woman came in around 11 asking for a small birthday arrangement, something cheerful, and Dara put one together with yellow ranunculus and sprigs of greenery, and one red stem in the centre, because red in the middle of yellow is what makes a thing pop, which was something she had learned in the first year. She wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with twine, and handed it across the counter, and she said she hoped the person it was for had a beautiful day. The woman said, "Thank you." The bell above the door chimed once when she left. Dara stood at the counter of her shop on Clement Street, which was hers now, and watched the door settle back into its frame. The room smelled like green stems and cold water and something sweeter underneath. The bud vase caught the February light coming through the window, and the rose inside it held its colour. She had always wondered what the roses were for. Now she knew. They were for nothing. They were not a debt being paid or a balance being struck. They were just the shape his gratitude had found when words weren't enough, and the deed was the shape it found when time was running short. Some kindness is done without a thought and changes everything downstream. Some gratitude is too large to say, and so it shows up instead, 1 week at a time, until the right form finally arrives. She tucked the pencil back into her hair. She had orders to fill. Was there ever a kindness you did without thinking that turned out to matter more than you knew? Leave a word in the comments. And if this story settled somewhere in you, there is another one here waiting. This story is a work of fiction created for this channel. Any resemblance to real persons or places is coincidental.